us. This is The World This Week. With us is Chris Dickey of the Newsweek and the Daily Beast, Marcus Mabry of the International Herald Tribune, and Elisabeth Moutet of the Sunday Telegraph and the Daily Telegraph, and Stefan de Vries of Dutch broadcaster RTL4. Welcome back to all of you. It doesn't bode well when the incoming Greek finance minister suffers a fainting spell before he's even sworn in. But here goes. Time to talk about the euro. The week that was and the week that will be. Now, on Friday, the Italian Premier, Mario Monti, had warned Europe has 1 week to save the euro. He hosted the leaders of Germany, Spain, and France. Up to now, with these last chance summits, it was bilateral meetings between Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy. This time, and Elisabeth, it's 4 people around the table.
I think it's because, in some ways, Angela Merkel. Well, first of all, it's convened in Rome. It's very difficult to do a summit in Rome without the Romans, but without Italy. But also, it's the French-German alliance doesn't really exist except as a structure. But what's inside it and how the policies of the two countries are going to work together is uncertain. And that's.
Were you expecting that we'd first see? Angela Merkel has not been to Paris since François Hollande was elected. Were you expecting to see a bilateral before there was this meeting with 4 people?
I think it would have made sense. I think it's rather surprising that there wasn't one. And I think they're all sort of the worst they want to do is to show any sort of obvious dissent, and therefore, and more than the declarations that have happened either in France or in Germany. And there were plenty of pot shots taken over the border, and so it was better not to show any kind of dissension beforehand than to run the risk of not looking quite sure of presenting an allied front on this one. You said in your introduction that the idea was also to kickstart the European economy. Well, that's a new one. I hadn't heard the kickstart thing. Is this the famous sort of relance? Is what the French, want to inject money into this and not just austerity. So I expect that Mrs. Merkel actually will she wants it to work, and therefore there will be some elements of this kickstarting that might take place. But that's a brand new game. I think that's still uncertain.
Stefan de Vries, how does this all bode for that summit at the end of next week?
Well, I've been to the last 2 years, I think, to...
How many last chance summits have you been to?
Yeah, 18 or 19, I lost count. But every time was the last summit before... Well, it was the mother of all summits, every time. Apart from last March, then we had a very relaxed summit. And because the crisis was over, that's what at least Herman van Rompuy said, and also Barroso. So everybody was really relaxed. And now 3 months later, we're back into the same game. And nothing basically changes. The only thing that really changes is maybe the role of Germany. I have the impression that Angela Merkel is becoming more and more isolated on the in the European field, and I don't know.
There are things that have changed. Spain's in a lot more trouble than it used to be, and it's going to.
Not really. I mean, it already was, but it was not really out in the open. That's the whole thing. I mean, if you follow the European current affairs on a day-to-day basis, like I do, then you're not surprised by anything anymore, because everything that's being said today as something new, like for instance this 130 billion growth stimulus that was agreed today upon in Rome, that's nothing new. It's already there for a very long time, because it's basically money that was already allocated for the regional funds of the European Union. There's money from the European Investment Bank, and there's some more money. So it's nothing new. It's basically... Every time it's a wordplay, and every time the journalists and especially the European people think, oh, now it's really the summit of all summits, and we only have 1 week, and then it's gone with the euro. It won't happen.
I do think what's new is I think the market's skepticism just keeps increasing, and I think it's kind of like gangrene. As you've got first it was Greece the foot, now it's up to Spain, which is a leg, and in fact gangrene it keeps spreading, and even though you're right, the underlying disease was always there, it's as it creeps up farther up the body, eventually the euro is under such pressure that it has no choice. I think out of fairness, Hollande's first visit after he was sworn in was to Germany, yes. So that was tipping his hat to the importance of that alliance. At the same time, the reason you have those 3 guys in Rome against Merkel was because all 3 of them together can kind of gang up on her and say, we think like the markets think, which is that you better allow us some flexibility here. You better back some of these measures like Euro bonds or something, which she's not going to back. Otherwise, the euro is going to be in danger. The euro is in danger. It will continue to be in danger. Next week, it will be in a worse position than it is this week because the market getting sick and tired of it. And Spanish costs will keep rising and go above 7% for debt.
Yeah, but at the same time, the euro is still very strong currency. It's still 1.26 cents.
That's because it's relative,
25 now, I
right?
think. But anyway, it's
125. Well, whatever. It was 0.80 10 years ago in dollar cents. So it's still very strong currency. And
What are you choosing? It's a renminbi. Well, it's not convertible.
Yeah,
If it
but
were,
look, there are a couple of new things. First of all, I thought it was very interesting that I think 8.5 billion euros of debt, of French debt, were sold yesterday. And they were sold at very, very good rates. The gangrene hasn't spread to France yet.
Exactly.
In fact, what's happened, what seems to have happened is that a hell of a lot of the money from Greece and Spain and Italy has come to France. And so France is shored up pretty well at this moment, which is very good and probably served Hollande well in the Rome meeting. And the other thing is that Christine Lagarde comes out and says
basically
Christine Lagarde, the head of the IMF, former finance minister under Sarkozy, she comes out and says basically what Hollande is saying. She says yes to euro bonds. She says yes to direct support for the banks. So that you talk about Merkel being isolated. When the IMF is coming out, which Merkel has been relying on to carry a lot of water for Germany in this crisis, and says basically, Angela, you're wrong. I think that does isolate her.
All right.
But I think Lagarde was doing this because she was ring fencing Greece. Greece is, she's been the bad sort of the bugaboo of Greece. Greece was wrong, but Greece is a small economy, and the idea is okay. We've got the bad guys, and they're a small. They even if it explodes, even if they leave the euro, it doesn't really matter. We can ring fence them out, and then let's preserve the rest. And so it's an interesting policy. It says right, one bad guy. End of story, and she rewrites the narrative because at the end of the day, perception is reality in economics, and especially in this crisis. What we say the markets believe, the markets are an inchoate number of 24-year-olds in front of square screens. I mean, it's not wisdom.
But if Angela Merkel is not willing to play game with that narrative, then it doesn't become the narrative.
But
if Germany doesn't agree, it doesn't.
All right, let's talk about that because that's important. You mentioning that Hollande has a win in his sails, and it's true, after last Sunday's legislative elections, never has a French socialist wielded as much power as Monsieur Hollande. His party controls both houses of parliament, 21 of 22 French regions. However, his government's already announced a surprise 10 billion euro shortfall this is for 2012.
Surprise.
With more surprises in store when it unveils an audit of public finances after next week's summit.
Surprise.
So that bargaining, that tete-a-tete that didn't take place, Marcus Mabry, who's got the upper hand right now? Is it Hollande with his two other musketeers from Rome and Spain, or is it Angela Merkel?
At the risk of being called too American here, I think he who has the checkbook and the money is the one with the power, and he in this case is Merkel. She's the one with the power. I don't care what the markets, and they are inchoate and don't exist, but unfortunately, capitalism they do. That's what makes things happen. The markets, whether it's the other European leaders, whether it's Hollande, it doesn't matter. It is what Merkel in Germany says that matters. What Christine Lagarde says doesn't matter.
At the end of the day, if you can't have euro bonds, for instance, then why are you going to have a euro? What's the point? If you're not going to share the debts, then why are you sharing the currency?
Make that argument in Berlin. The Berlin argument is, well, we're happy to share the debt if we get to share the responsibility.
If we get to tell everybody else to run their country the way we run ours.
Let's listen to Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, showing a carrot and stick in what I guess Stefan de Vries would call the usual rhetoric, saying yes to a financial transaction tax, but when it comes to mopping up Europe's sovereign debt, there's no such thing as a free lunch.
We need to come together politically, especially in the Eurozone. Those who have a common currency must have a consistent, coherent general policy. Therefore, together, we will work for a better, stronger political integration. The crisis has taught us that there should be more for Europe, not less for Europe.
And the subtext to that, of course, is if you want real reform, Brussels has to have the right to look at your books.
Yeah, well, it already has, but since 2 years. But actually what she's saying is we have to go towards a federation, which I really like, contrary to all the other things she says. But that's my personal opinion. But the thing is that France is always really, gets red dots in the neck as soon as you talk about federation, because that means that France will have less power. So it's really a paradox, a very difficult paradox, because France is also saying that we need more Europe. But as soon as you ask, but how? Then nobody has the answer. So it's interesting because she's moving towards a federation. That's something that she didn't do 2 years ago, and it's once again a proof that she's changing her mind constantly. Every 3-4 months, she does exactly the opposite from what she said previously. I think this is a very interesting move, and we also see that, for instance, the Netherlands, which has been always the poodle, the dog of Germany, following Germany in everything they said, is now saying, no, we don't want political integration, we don't want a federation, and so the Netherlands is becoming very isolated, and Germany is going towards an ever closer union, as it is called in the constitution or the treaty. So that's an interesting development. But I would like to see how François Hollande is going to cope with it the next 5 years, because in his heart he's a real European and also in favor of federation, but his country isn't. So
I'd like to see how he copes with it in the next 5 weeks.
Well, yeah.
And, when you say Hollande, it's going to be more like Moscovici, because it's not Hollande's
the finance minister,
who used to be European Affairs Minister.
How about Mr. Europe, the foreign minister?
Hollande Fabius? I don't think he plays
One
a
who
part in this.
opposed the European Constitution.
Yeah.
Yes, but it's going to be a team of Moscovici, the finance minister, of to some extent Bernard Cazeneuve, the European affairs minister, and the people around Hollande. And by and large, I don't think there's a scintilla of difference within the thought processes of most of their technocrats and the ones who were around Sarkozy. I think there's far less difference than people believe in that. And they will the way they've already sort of announced the audit and everything, it's very obvious that now that they've won all the elections, they realize that the country can't go on as it is. I suspect that the Germans are going to be more pleased with this French government than they thought until now.
And by the way, who better to bash the French than the British?
I've said before that if the French go ahead with a 75% top rate of tax, we will roll out the red carpet and welcome more French businesses to Britain, and they can pay taxes in Britain, and that can pay for our health service and our schools and everything else.
Why did he make that statement in Mexico, Marcus?
Well, I was thinking somebody's got to pay for the British schools and health services, because it's not happening now with his policies. Austerity has not worked in the UK. I live in London, and we are in great pain in the UK. And so this government's policy, which is using kind of the fig leaf of Europe, is saying, oh, we have to spend some more money now, actually, even though we didn't want to. It's just because of Europe. It's in such a bad crack. No, it's because your austerity program has failed. It is not. It's only been a downward spiral. It has not created more revenue. It hasn't created a relancement in the UK, and it's actually a very bad situation. So
you realise that austerity program actually has practically not started being enforced. It's been announced quite a lot.
Something to look forward to.
Exactly. But actually, most of the cuts that everybody sort of screams about have not been enforced yet in Britain.
True.
So if anything, it's not been happening fast enough.
Well, and as was pointed out in The Guardian, this is inviting people to dodge French taxes. When in fact people who are British and live in Britain can't dodge British taxes.
Well, some of them do.
Well, some of them, of course.
It
is
the
pretty
rich
hard.
ones.
It is very rich. It's very rich.
The very rich ones. So actually what France should do is say to the British, you don't have to pay British taxes if you come here to France, and we'll make your life easy.
Well, and it's interesting, as any American can tell you, in fact, the taxes you're going to pay in Britain are pretty, are really not a neo-capitalist kind of system tax. It's actually very high socialist taxes, actually, one would say.
All right. Tax reform, of course, one of the issues that will have to be addressed sooner or later. We'll see if it comes up at this Last Chance Summit. Before we go, Uruguay's Volkswagen Beetle driving president has come up with a novel way to fight rising drug-related crime. José Pepe Mujica's left-wing government drafting a bill that would legalize production and sale of marijuana. Only the government would be allowed to sell it, and consumers would have to register on a government database. Each pot cigarette would include a barcode, so authorities could check that it wasn't being resold under the counter, with profits from this scheme reportedly going to drug rehabilitation.
We immediately want to combat two different things: the consumption of drugs and the trafficking of drugs. We believe that prohibiting the use of certain drugs creates more problems in society than the drug itself.
Stefan de Vries, the Netherlands. Drug consumption is marijuana consumption is legal. Is
Well,
that a
not
smart
legal,
move?
it's all right.
What the Uruguayan government's coming up?
Well, actually, when I was doing some research on this, I found out that the use of cannabis is not illegal in Uruguay. So it's not a legal issue. It's basically fighting the dealers, which is indeed the biggest problem. And I think it's a smart move because the use of drugs in general, I think, is not a criminal matter. It's a matter of public health. And although that's a lot of politicians think otherwise. For instance, America, their war on drugs is one of the many wars they've lost in the last couple of decades. But it's probably the most stupid war they've ever fought because it's simply not working and it's basically aggravating the situation. So legalizing the use of drugs to control basically the supply chain, I think it's a very smart move, and it's all, if you want to fight crimes related to drugs, then this is the way you should go.
And on Facebook, not everyone agrees. Olufemi from Owerri, Nigeria, says, I think it will be a crazy idea. Will it be a crazy idea, Christopher Dick?
I think it's the best, actually. It's the best idea I've heard about drug legalization in a long time. Make it a state monopoly, have the government totally control the trade, and I think that you can begin to do something about it. I think what doesn't make a lot of sense is what's been done in the Netherlands, where you decriminalize it and you create this huge gray area that can be exploited by all kinds of criminal elements. But actually having the government control it, I think, makes perfect sense.
All right, and one word on it briefly because we're out of time.
Well, of course, this idea came from somebody who drives a Volkswagen Beetle because that's who was smoking the spliffs all that time long ago in the 60s.
I don't know. He looks like he's doing something else.
No, but I think he was
wine.
actually, yes, it's a very good decision. Take alcohol. Every government in the world levies huge taxes on alcohol and sells it. And at one time it was illegal.
It could be made into a lucrative process.
It could be made into a lucrative process, and perhaps they will have
All right.
vintages and
we're
good qualities.
Unfortunately out of time.
certainly
We'll talk
will.
about other business schemes next time.
Let's
But
bring to
Elisabeth
that.
Moutet, I want to thank you. And I want to thank Christopher Dickey, Marcus Mabry, and Stefan de Vries. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week. Stay with us. Coming up next, it's business. Catherine Nicholson has all the day's news.